The sun was a merciless white disk in the endless New Mexico sky, and Nora Reeves had stopped sweating an hour ago, which she knew meant death was coming for her with patient, measured steps. Her feet dragged through the brittle prairie grass, each movement requiring a conscious effort that her body was increasingly unwilling to make. The wagon train had left her behind 3 days ago, when her father's lungs finally gave out from the consumption that had been eating him alive since St. Louis, and the wagon master refused to wait for a lone woman to finish burying her dead. She had caught glimpses of their dust on the horizon that first day, but by the second morning, there was nothing but emptiness in every direction. And now, on this third day, in August of 1881, Nora understood with crystalline clarity that she was going to die alone on this God-forsaken prairie. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, her tongue swollen in her mouth like a piece of old leather. The canteen had run dry yesterday afternoon. She had tried to ration it, tried to make it last, but the heat was so intense it seemed to pull the moisture right out of her skin. Her dark hair, once pinned properly beneath her bonnet, now hung in tangled ropes down her back. The bonnet itself had blown away sometime that morning, or maybe it was yesterday. Time had become slippery, unreliable. She was 22 years old, and she was going to die before she ever really lived. The world tilted suddenly, and Nora realized she was on her knees without remembering how she got there. The grass felt sharp against her palms. She tried to push herself back up, but her arms trembled and gave out. The ground rose up to meet her face, or maybe she fell toward it. Either way, the impact was surprisingly gentle, almost welcoming. The earth was warm beneath her cheek, and she thought maybe she would just rest here for a moment, just close her eyes for a heartbeat or two. Darkness pulled at the edges of her vision, and she surrendered to it gratefully. Somewhere in the swimming black, she felt movement. Strong arms sliding beneath her knees and shoulders, lifting her as though she weighed nothing at all. She tried to open her eyes, but her eyelids were made of stone. A voice rumbled above her, deep and concerned, saying words she could not quite grasp. The movement continued, steady and rhythmic, like being rocked in a cradle. She felt the solid warmth of a chest against her cheek, heard the steady thump of a heartbeat that was not her own. Water touched her lips, just a trickle, and her body responded with desperate animal need. She tried to gulp it down, but a firm hand pulled the canteen away. The voice again, clearer now, easy now, just a little at a time or you will make yourself sick. More water, another small sip. Then another. Her throat worked convulsively, trying to draw life back into her dying body. Consciousness flickered like a candle flame, there and gone and there again. When she finally managed to crack her eyes open, the sun had moved significantly across the sky, and she was moving, cradled against someone who smelled of leather and horse and clean sweat. The man carrying her was tall. She could tell that even from her position against his chest. His jaw was dark with several days of stubble, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. His eyes, when they flicked down to check on her, were a startling pale blue, like creek water over stones. "You are awake," he said, and there was relief in his voice. "Good. Thought I might have found you too late." Nora tried to speak but only managed a croak. He shifted her weight carefully, reaching for his canteen again and holding it to her lips. This time she managed to control herself better, taking small measured sips. "Where?" she finally managed. "Middle of nowhere, near as I can tell," he said. His voice had a trace of humor in it despite the grim circumstances. "Found you collapsed about 2 miles back. Been walking since. There is a trading post another 8 or 9 miles east. Figure I can get you there by nightfall if I keep a good pace." "Your horse," Nora whispered, "threw a shoe and went lame yesterday. Had to put him down this morning." The pain in those words was evident. Was walking back to Deeming when I saw something dark on the ground that was not a rock or a bush. Turned out to be you. Nora's mind struggled to process this. He had no horse, was on foot in the middle of the desert, and now he was carrying her. She was not a large woman, but she was no child either, and he had already carried her 2 miles and intended to carry her 8 or 9 more. Too heavy, she protested weakly. Put me down. Not a chance, madam. You could not walk 20 feet in your condition, and I am not leaving you to die out here. You will die too if you exhaust yourself. He actually smiled at that, a quick flash of white teeth against sun-browned skin. I am tougher than I look. Name is Tobias Morgan, by the way. Most folks call me Tobias. Nora Reeves. Her voice was getting a little stronger. The water was working its way into her system, bringing her back from the edge. Why are you doing this? He was quiet for a moment, his boots making steady rhythmic sounds against the hard earth. Because leaving someone to die when you can help them is not something a man can live with. At least, not any kind of man I want to be. They fell silent after that, Nora too weak to maintain conversation, and Tobias apparently needing to conserve his energy for the long walk ahead. She dozed in fits and starts, waking periodically to find the landscape unchanged in any meaningful way. More prairie, more scrub brush, more endless sky. But Tobias kept walking, his pace never flagging, his arms steady beneath her. When she woke more fully, the sun was considerably lower, painting the western sky in shades of orange and pink. Her head felt clearer, though her body still felt like it had been wrung out and left to dry. Tobias's shirt was soaked with sweat, his breathing heavier than before, but he had not slowed. How much farther? She asked. 3 miles, maybe 4. We will make it before full dark. You need to rest. Can rest when we get there. He adjusted his grip on her slightly. Tell me something, Nora Reeves. How did you end up alone out here? So she told him, her voice quiet against the vast openness around them. About her father's illness, about leaving Missouri with dreams of starting fresh in California. About how the consumption had gotten worse as they traveled, how he had grown weaker and weaker until finally his lungs could not draw another breath. About the wagon master who had no patience for a young woman who needed time to dig a grave and say prayers over her father's body. They left you, Tobias said, and there was steel in his voice. Just left you there alone. He said I could catch up when I was done, but by the time I finished, they were too far ahead. I tried to follow their tracks, but I must have gotten turned around. She closed her eyes against the memory of those first panicked hours when she realized she was truly alone. I ran out of water yesterday, thought I was walking east, but I guess I was not. You were walking south, Tobias said, straight into the worst of the desert. Another day and you would have been past saving. The thought should have terrified her, but she was too tired for fear. Instead, she felt a strange gratitude toward this man who had found her, this stranger who was literally carrying her to safety at the cost of his own strength and comfort. What were you doing out here alone? She asked. Cowboy work. Was delivering a string of horses to a ranch north of here. Got paid, was heading back to Deeming when my horse stepped wrong and cracked his leg. His voice tightened. Had to shoot him. He was a good horse. Had him for 3 years. I am sorry. Not your fault, just bad luck. He was quiet for a moment. Though maybe it was good luck too, in a way. If I had not been walking this stretch, I never would have found you. Nora thought about that, about the strange chain of events that had to happen for her to survive. Her father dying where he did. The wagon train leaving her, getting lost. Tobias's horse going lame right where and when it did. It seemed impossible, the kind of coincidence that should not exist, and yet here she was, alive because of it. Do you believe in fate? She asked. Tobias considered this. Never thought much about it before, but maybe sometimes things happen for a reason we cannot see right away. The trading post appeared on the horizon just as the sun was touching the western edge of the world. It was a low adobe building with a corral and a few smaller structures scattered around it. Nora felt Tobias's arms tighten slightly, his pace picking up just a fraction. He was nearing the end of his endurance, she realized. He had been carrying her for hours, probably close to 10 or 11 miles total, and he had done it without stopping, without resting, driven by nothing but sheer determination. A man emerged from the trading post as they approached, shading his eyes against the dying light. "What in the hell?" "Need help," Tobias called out, his voice rough with fatigue. "Found this woman collapsed on the prairie. She needs water, food, and a place to rest." The man, heavyset with a gray beard, hurried over. "Bring her inside. Martha," he called over his shoulder. "Got a woman here in bad shape." Tobias carried Nora into the building, which was blessedly cool after the heat of the day. A woman appeared, older and weathered but with kind eyes. She directed Tobias to lay Nora on a cot in the corner, and only then, as he finally set her down, did Nora see how badly the journey had cost him. His face was gray beneath the sunburn, his hands shaking with exhaustion. He swayed on his feet. "You need to sit down," the woman Martha said firmly. "Samuel, get this man some water and food. He looks about ready to drop." "The woman first," Tobias said stubbornly. "We can tend to both of you." "Sit." Martha pushed him toward a chair and he collapsed into it gratefully. Samuel brought water and Tobias drank deeply while Martha turned her attention to Nora. The older woman was efficient and kind, checking Nora's pulse, peering into her eyes, making her drink water slowly and steadily. She brought cool cloths to wipe Nora's face and hands and produced a bowl of thin broth that Nora managed to get down despite her protesting stomach. "You are lucky," Martha said. "Another few hours and you would have been gone." "Where did he find you?" "Miles west," Nora said. "I do not know exactly. I was with a wagon train but got separated." Martha's mouth tightened. "Separated or abandoned? Does it matter? I suppose not. You are here now and you will recover, but you need rest and proper food for a few days before you will be fit to travel again." Across the room, Samuel was tending to Tobias, who had finished his water and was working on a plate of beans and cornbread. The color was returning to his face, though he still looked exhausted. "That was a fool thing you did," Samuel said, but there was respect in his voice. "Carrying a full-grown woman 10 miles in this heat could have killed you both." "Could not leave her," Tobias said simply. "Most men would have." "Then most men are less than they should be." Nora felt something warm unfold in her chest at those words. She had known Tobias Morgan for only a few hours, most of which she had spent unconscious or barely aware, but she already knew he was unlike any man she had ever met. There was a core of decency in him that seemed unshakable, a moral compass that pointed true north no matter what. As night fell fully outside, Martha made up a second cot for Tobias and insisted both her patients get some sleep. Nora was too tired to argue, and she could see Tobias was the same. She lay in the darkness listening to the quiet sounds of the trading post settling in for the night, and the last thing she heard before sleep claimed her was Tobias's steady breathing from the cot a few feet away, and she felt safer than she had in months. She woke several times during the night, always disoriented for a moment before remembering where she was. Each time, she could hear Tobias's breathing, could see his form in the darkness, and each time she felt that same sense of safety. This man had saved her life. Had literally carried her for miles through brutal heat, risking his own life to save hers. The weight of that debt felt enormous, impossible to ever repay. Morning came with pale light filtering through the small windows. Nora woke to find Martha already up, preparing breakfast. The smell of coffee and frying bacon made her stomach growl audibly, and Martha smiled when she heard it. That is a good sign. Means your body is remembering what it needs. She brought over a tin plate loaded with bacon, eggs, and thick slices of bread. Eat slowly. Your stomach is not ready for a big meal yet, but you need to start building your strength back up. Nora sat up carefully, relieved to find her head did not swim as badly as it had yesterday. She was weak and shaky, but the desperate, dehydrated feeling was gone. She ate slowly, savoring every bite, and washed it down with strong black coffee that tasted better than anything she could remember. Tobias woke a short while later, and Nora was struck again by how handsome he was in the morning light. He looked younger than she had initially thought, probably only about 26 or 27. His hair was light brown, sun-streaked, and badly in need of a cut. His eyes, that pale, startling blue, found her immediately when he sat up. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Better. Much better." "Thank you to you." He shook his head. "Just did what needed doing." Martha brought him breakfast, and he ate with the single-minded focus of a man who had burned a tremendous amount of energy and needed to replace it. When he finished, Samuel came over and sat down at the rough wooden table. "Need to talk about what comes next," the older man said. "Nora, you are welcome to stay here as long as you need to recover, but after that, you will need to figure out where you are going. The wagon train you were with is long gone by now, probably 3 or 4 days ahead at least." "I know." Nora had been thinking about this already. "I cannot catch up to them on foot, and even if I could, I am not sure I want to. They left me to die." "Understandable. So what will you do?" That was the question, was it not? She had no money to speak of, just the few dollars sewn into her skirt hem that her father had insisted she keep for emergencies. She had no family, no connections in this part of the country. She had been heading to California because her father had wanted to, but now he was gone and she had no real attachment to that destination. "I suppose I will need to find work," she said slowly. "Maybe in Deeming. Is there a town nearby?" "Deeming is about 15 miles east," Samuel said. "Growing town, lots of opportunity with the railroad coming through. Might be you could find something there." "I could take you," Tobias said suddenly. "I am heading back there anyway. Once you are strong enough to travel, we could go together." Nora looked at him, this man who had already done so much for her. "You have done enough. I cannot ask you to do more." "You are not asking. I am offering." His blue eyes were steady on hers. "It is not safe for a woman to travel alone out here. You learned that the hard way already." He was right, though it galled her to admit she needed help. But pride was a luxury she could not afford right now. "Then I accept. Thank you." They stayed at the trading post for 3 days. Martha fussed over Nora, making sure she ate regularly and rested, slowly rebuilding her strength. Samuel produced a spare dress that had belonged to his daughter before she married and moved to Texas, and Nora was grateful to change out of her filthy, torn traveling clothes. She washed her hair in a basin of water. Martha heated for her, combing out the tangles until it hung smooth and dark down her back. Tobias spent the time helping Samuel with work around the trading post, repairing a section of fence, fixing a broken wagon wheel, doing whatever needed doing. Nora watched him work from the shade of the porch, noting the easy competence with which he approached every task. He was a man used to working with his hands, used to solving problems through practical action. On the second evening, as they sat outside watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, Tobias told her more about himself. He had grown up in Texas, the youngest of 4 boys. His parents had a small ranch, nothing fancy, but they made it work. When he was 19, he had headed out on his own to make his own way, working as a cowboy for various ranches across Texas and New Mexico. He was good with horses, good with cattle, and good at surviving in a harsh land. "You ever think about settling down?" Nora asked. "Getting your own place?" "Sometimes, but it takes money to buy land and cowboy wages do not add up fast." He was quiet for a moment. "Besides, I have gotten used to moving around, not sure I would know what to do with myself if I stayed in one place too long." "Sounds lonely." He glanced at her, something unreadable in his eyes. "It can be, but it is what I know." Nora understood that. She had known loneliness too, especially these past few months watching her father fade away, knowing she was about to lose the last family she had in the world. There was a strange kinship in that shared understanding of solitude. On the third day, Martha declared Nora fit enough to travel, though she cautioned her to take it easy and not push herself too hard. Samuel sold them supplies, refusing to take payment for Nora's care, and only accepting a few coins from Tobias for the food they would need on the road. "You did a good thing, son," Samuel said, gripping Tobias's hand. "Not many men would have done what you did." "Not many men would have taken us in like you did," Tobias replied. "Thank you for everything." They set out early the next morning, walking side by side on the rough trail toward Deeming. Nora felt weak at first, her muscles protesting the effort after days of lying down, but she pushed through it. Tobias matched his pace to hers without comment, and when she needed to rest, he found shade and they would sit for a while before continuing. They talked as they walked, sharing stories of their lives. Nora told him about growing up in Missouri, about her mother who had died when she was 10, about how close she had been to her father. Tobias told her about his brothers, about learning to rope cattle, about a rattlesnake he had killed when he was 12 that had been as long as he was tall. "Were you scared?" Nora asked, terrified. "But my brother dared me to do it and I was too stubborn to back down." He grinned at the memory. "My father tanned my hide for being reckless, then made me a hatband out of the skin. Do you still have it?" "Somewhere. Probably in my saddlebags back in Deeming. Had to leave my gear there when I took the job delivering the horses." The miles passed slowly but steadily. They stopped at midday to rest during the hottest part of the day, finding shade beside a dry creek bed. Tobias shared out jerky and hardtack from their supplies, and they drank sparingly from their canteens, mindful that they still had miles to go. "Can I ask you something?" Nora said as they rested. "Sure. When you found me, you could have just given me water and left me there. Gone for help maybe. But instead you carried me." "Why?" Tobias considered the question carefully. "Because I did not know if help would arrive in time, because leaving you there, even with water, felt like abandoning you, and because once I picked you up, turning back felt wrong. Forward was the only direction that made sense. You could have died. So could you? For certain." He looked at her directly. "Your life was not worth less than mine just because we were strangers." Something in Nora's chest tightened at those words. She had spent the last few months feeling like a burden, like her existence was an inconvenience to everyone around her. The wagon master had made it clear he saw her as dead weight. But Tobias had risked everything to save her, and he did not seem to think he deserved any particular credit for it. "It was simply what you did for another human being in trouble." "I think you are a rare kind of man, Tobias Morgan," she said quietly. He looked embarrassed, turning his attention back to the jerky in his hand. "I am just a man, nothing special about me." But there was, Nora thought. There really was. They reached Deeming as the sun was setting, and Nora was struck by how much larger it was than she had expected. The town sprawled across the flat landscape, a collection of adobe and wood buildings clustered around the railroad tracks. She could hear the distant sound of a piano playing in one of the saloons, could see lights beginning to glow in windows as evening settled in. "It has grown a lot in the past year," Tobias said, noting her surprise. "Railroad is bringing in new people all the time. Where should I go?" The question felt enormous. She had no contacts here, no plan beyond surviving the next few days. Tobias seemed to think about this. "There is a boarding house run by a woman named Mrs. Chen. She is fair and her rates are reasonable. I can take you there, help you get settled." "You have done so much already." "Few more minutes would not kill me," he smiled at her. "Come on, let's get you somewhere safe for the night." Mrs. Chen's boarding house was a neat two-story building near the center of town. The woman herself was a tiny Chinese woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She looked Nora up and down, then nodded. "You look like you have had a hard time of it," she said, her English accented but clear. "I have a room available. $3 a week includes 2 meals a day." Nora's heart sank. At that rate, her small supply of money would last maybe 2 weeks, 3 if she was very careful, but she had no other options right now. "I will take it. Thank you." Mrs. Chen showed her to a small but clean room on the second floor. It had a bed, a washstand, and a small window overlooking the street. After days on the prairie and sleeping on a cot at the trading post, it looked like heaven. When she came back downstairs, she found Tobias waiting in the front parlor, his hat in his hands. He stood when she entered. "All settled?" "Yes, thank you for bringing me here." "It is no problem." He hesitated, seeming uncertain for the first time since she met him. "I was thinking if you need help finding work, I might know some people who are hiring. I could ask around for you." "You have done so much for me already, I cannot keep taking from you." "You are not taking, I am offering." He met her eyes. "Truth is, I would like to see you again. Make sure you are doing all right." Nora felt her heart skip. There was something in the way he looked at her, something warm and genuine that made her feel things she had not expected to feel. This man who had saved her life, who had carried her through the desert, who was still trying to help her even though he owed her nothing. "I would like that too," she said quietly. His smile was brilliant. "Then I will come by tomorrow. Maybe we can get breakfast at the hotel restaurant and I will introduce you to some people." "That sounds wonderful." He left then, and Nora stood at the window watching him walk down the street until he disappeared around a corner. She touched her fingers to the glass, her reflection looking back at her in the darkening window. For the first time since her father died, she felt something other than grief and fear. She felt hope. True to his word, Tobias appeared the next morning just as Nora was finishing the simple breakfast Mrs. Chen provided to her boarders. He had cleaned up, shaved, and changed into fresh clothes, and Nora felt suddenly self-conscious about her own borrowed dress and worn boots. But his smile when he saw her was warm and uncomplicated. "You look rested," he said. "I feel almost human again." She grabbed her shawl, such as it was. "Where are we going?" "Thought we would start at the general store. Owner's wife is looking for help, I heard, and then maybe the hotel. They might need someone in the kitchen or helping with laundry." They spent the morning walking through Deeming, Tobias introducing her to various shopkeepers and business owners. Nora was struck by how well known he seemed to be, how many people greeted him by name. For a man who described himself as just a drifting cowboy, he had clearly made an impression on this town. The general store was run by a couple named Henry and Alice Porter. Alice was a plump, cheerful woman who took one look at Nora and seemed to make up her mind immediately. "You have experience with keeping accounts?" she asked. "Yes, madam. I helped my father with his business records for years." "Can you read and write well?" "Yes, madam." "Then you are hired if you want the job. I need someone to help mind the store, keep track of inventory, help customers. Pay is $6 a week, and you can start tomorrow if you are able." Nora felt dizzy with relief. $6 a week would be enough to pay her rent and have a little left over for other necessities. It was not a fortune, but it was survival, and right now that was everything. I want the job. Thank you so much. Thank Tobias here, Alice said, winking at the cowboy. He is the one who told me you were looking for work and vouched for your character. Nora turned to Tobias, who looked slightly embarrassed. You did that? Mentioned to a few people that you were new in town and looking for employment. That is all. That is not all. But her protest was gentle, grateful. Thank you. They left the store and Tobias suggested they get lunch to celebrate. They went to a small restaurant that served Mexican food, and Nora discovered she was ravenous. She ate enchiladas smothered in red sauce while Tobias worked his way through a plate of tamales, and they talked easily, the conversation flowing naturally between them. What will you do now? Nora asked. Do you have another job lined up? I am working for the Miller Ranch right now, just outside of town. They need hands for the roundup coming up. He paused. But I am thinking of staying in the area for a while. Deeming is growing. Might be opportunities here beyond just cowboy work. Like what? Not sure yet. But I am tired of drifting. Maybe it is time to put down some roots. Nora wondered if she was part of that decision, but she did not dare ask. They had known each other less than a week. Yes, he had saved her life, and yes, there was clearly something between them, some spark of connection that felt significant. But it was too soon to assume anything, too soon to read too much into his kindness. Still, when he walked her back to the boarding house and said he would like to see her again, maybe take her to dinner later in the week, she said yes without hesitation. The days fell into a rhythm after that. Nora worked at the general store, learning the inventory and the regular customers. Alice Porter was a good employer, patient and kind, and she seemed genuinely interested in Nora's well-being. The work was not difficult, but it kept her busy and gave her a sense of purpose she had been lacking. Tobias came by several times a week, always finding excuses to stop in at the store or to meet her when her workday ended. They would walk through town together, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about the ranch work, about the ornery cattle and the green horses that needed breaking. She told him about the customers at the store, about the gossip she overheard, about her plans to save up enough money to maybe rent a small house of her own someday. On Saturday evening, 2 weeks after they arrived in Deeming, Tobias took her to dinner at the hotel restaurant. It was the fanciest place Nora had eaten in years, with white tablecloths and actual menus. She ordered chicken with dumplings and Tobias got a steak, and they shared a bottle of wine that made her cheeks flush and her laughter come easier. "Can I tell you something?" Tobias said as they lingered over coffee after the meal. "Of course." "When I found you on the prairie, I thought you were already dead. You were so still and the sun was so brutal, I almost kept walking." He looked down at his cup. "But something made me go check. And when I realized you were still breathing, still alive, I felt this overwhelming need to save you. Like it was the most important thing I would ever do." Nora reached across the table and took his hand. His fingers were calloused and strong, and they closed around hers with gentle firmness. "You did save me, in more ways than you know." "I am glad I found you," he said, his blue eyes intense on hers. "Not just because I could help you, but because I met you. These past few weeks, getting to know you, they have been the best weeks I have had in a long time." "For me too," she whispered. He paid for dinner and they walked back through the cooling evening air. When they reached the boarding house, Tobias hesitated on the front steps. "Nora, I know this might seem fast. We have not known each other long, but I need you to know that my feelings for you are real, strong. I think about you all the time. When I am working, when I am trying to sleep, you are always there in my thoughts." Nora's heart was pounding. I feel the same way. I tried tried to tell myself it was too soon, that I was just grateful for what you did. But it is more than that. You are more than that. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle. Can I kiss you? Yes. His lips met hers softly at first, tentative, questioning. Nora leaned into it, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, feeling the solid warmth of him. The kiss deepened, becoming more sure, more passionate. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. Lord, woman, Tobias said, his voice rough. You are going to be the death of me in the best possible way. Nora laughed, feeling giddy and alive and more hopeful than she had felt in years. I will see you tomorrow. You could not keep me away. They began courting in earnest after that. Tobias was attentive and thoughtful, bringing her small gifts, wildflowers he picked on his rides, a ribbon for her hair he saw in the general store window. They spent every moment they could together, learning each other, discovering the ways they fit. Nora learned that Tobias had a deep love for animals, that he could be surprisingly tender with the horses he worked with. She learned that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. She learned that he was fiercely protective of the people he cared about, and that he had no patience for bullies or men who mistreated women. Tobias learned that Nora was stronger than she looked, that her time of hardship had forged her into someone resilient and determined. He learned that she loved to read, that she devoured any book she could get her hands on. He learned that she had a beautiful singing voice that she was shy about sharing, and that when she did sing, it made his chest ache with emotion. 3 months after that first kiss, on a cool November evening, Tobias asked her to marry him. They were sitting on the porch of the boarding house, wrapped in blankets against the chill, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. I do not have much to offer you, he said. I have been saving my wages, but it is not enough for a house yet. Maybe in another year or two. But I love you, Nora. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. And I want to spend the rest of my life with you if you will have me. Nora's eyes filled with tears. You saved my life, and then you gave me a reason to live it. Of course I will marry you. He kissed her then, long and deep, and when they finally broke apart, they were both grinning like fools. Tobias produced a simple gold band from his pocket. It is not fancy. But I wanted you to have something. Nora slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. It is perfect. You are perfect. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Deeming. Alice and Henry Porter stood up for them, and Mrs. Chen provided a wedding supper at the boarding house for a small gathering of friends. Nora wore a new dress that Alice had helped her sew, pale blue with lace at the collar, and Tobias wore his best clothes and looked so handsome it made her breath catch. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Tobias kissed her like she was the most precious thing in the world, and Nora felt her heart overflow with love and gratitude. This man who had carried her miles to safety had become her whole world, and she was his. They moved into a small house on the outskirts of town that they rented from one of the ranchers Tobias worked for. It was not much, just 3 rooms and a covered porch, but it was theirs. Nora planted flowers in the yard and hung curtains in the windows. Tobias built her a bookshelf and slowly filled it with volumes he bought or traded for. They were happy in a simple, profound way, finding joy in the everyday rhythms of married life. Tobias continued working as a cowboy, but he began to branch out, taking on other work around town. He had a knack for fixing things, and word spread that Tobias Morgan could repair just about anything. He started getting hired for carpentry work, for shoeing horses, for building fences. The money was better than just cowboy wages, and they began to save in earnest for a place of their own. Nora continued at the general store, and Alice came to rely on her more and more. When Henry's health began to fail the following spring, Alice asked Nora to take over much of the day-to-day management of the store. It came with a raise in pay and more responsibility, and Nora threw herself into the work with determination. On a warm evening in June, sitting on their porch watching the sunset, Nora took Tobias's hand and placed it on her stomach. "I have something to tell you." He looked at her, questions in his eyes, and then understanding dawned. "Really, really. The baby should come in January." Tobias let out a whoop of joy and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until she was laughing and breathless. When he set her down, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "We are going to have a baby." "A baby, Nora. We are. Are you happy?" Happy does not even begin to cover it. The pregnancy was not easy. Nora suffered from terrible morning sickness for the first few months, and the summer heat made her miserable. But Tobias was endlessly patient, bringing her water, holding her hair when she was sick, rubbing her aching back. As her belly grew, he became almost comically protective, trying to prevent her from doing any kind of heavy lifting and fretting whenever she was on her feet too long. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she finally told him in exasperation one day when he tried to stop her from sweeping the floor. I know. I just want to take care of you. You do. You take wonderful care of me, but I need to be able to do things for myself too." He relented, though she caught him hovering nervously whenever she did anything that he deemed remotely strenuous. It was annoying and endearing in equal measure, and she loved him all the more for it. Their son was born on a cold January night in 1883, in their little house with a midwife attending and Tobias pacing a trench in the floor of the front room. It was a long, difficult labor, and there were moments when Nora thought she might die from the pain of it. But when the baby finally emerged, red and squalling and perfect, she forgot all about the pain. "It is a boy," the midwife announced, cleaning him up and wrapping him in a blanket. "A healthy boy." Tobias was allowed in then, and the look on his face when he saw his son for the first time made Nora's heart swell until she thought it might burst. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, and she placed the baby in his arms. He held the tiny bundle like it was made of the most fragile glass, his big hands impossibly gentle. "He is perfect," Tobias whispered. "Absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Nora asked. They had discussed names endlessly but never quite settled on one. Now, looking at their son, Tobias said, "What about James, after your father?" Nora felt tears spring to her eyes. Her father would never meet his grandson, but having the baby carry his name felt right. "James Tobias Morgan, I love it. James it is then." Tobias leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Thank you for him. Thank you for everything." Being parents transformed them in ways both exhausting and wonderful. James was a colicky baby who cried frequently and slept poorly, and there were many nights when Nora and Tobias took turns walking him around the house, trying to soothe him. But there were also moments of pure magic, like when James first smiled at them, or when he grabbed Tobias's finger in his tiny fist and held on tight. Tobias proved to be a natural father, patient and loving even when he was running on no sleep and frazzled nerves. He sang to James in a low, rumbling voice, old cowboy songs and hymns he remembered from childhood. He built a cradle with his own hands, sanding it smooth so there would be no chance of splinters. He worked even harder at his various jobs, driven by the need to provide for his growing family. 2 years later, they had saved enough to buy a small piece of land just outside Deeming. It was only 10 acres, but it had a creek running through it and good grazing for horses. Tobias built them a house, working on it every spare moment he had. It was bigger than the rental, with a real parlor and 2 bedrooms and a kitchen with a proper stove. When they finally moved in, Nora stood in the middle of the empty parlor and cried with happiness. "We did it," she said. "We have a home. A real home." Tobias wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "We did, and it is just the beginning." He started a horse training business, using his years of experience to gentle and train horses for ranchers and farmers in the area. He had a gift for it, a way of understanding horses that made them trust him. Word spread, and soon he had more business than he could handle. Nora managed the books and the scheduling, and slowly but surely they built something solid and lasting. Their daughter Sarah was born in the spring of 1885, an easier birth than James had been. She had Nora's dark hair and Tobias's blue eyes, and she was a calm, content baby who seemed to take everything in stride. James, now 2.5, was initially suspicious of this interloper, but he quickly became fiercely protective of his little sister. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The business grew steadily. James started school and proved to be a bright, curious student. Sarah toddled after her father everywhere, determined to be involved in whatever he was doing. Nora divided her time between helping with the business and managing their household, and found herself happier than she had ever imagined possible. On their 5th wedding anniversary, they sat on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard. James was teaching Sarah how to throw a ball, though at 2 years old, she mostly just picked it up and dropped it. The evening air was cool and pleasant, filled with the sounds of birds settling in for the night. "Do you ever think about that day?" Nora asked. "When you found me on the prairie, all the time," Tobias said. "It changed everything for me, changed the whole course of my life." "Mine too. I was ready to die that day. I had given up, and then you appeared like some kind of miracle. I was just a man whose horse went lame." "No." She turned to face him fully. "You were a good man who did the right thing even though it cost you. You saved my life and then you gave me this life. This beautiful, wonderful life." Tobias cupped her face in his hands, the same gesture he had made the first time he kissed her. "You gave me a life too. Before I found you, I was just drifting, no direction, no real purpose. You gave me a home, a family, a reason to build something lasting. We built it together. We did." He kissed her softly. "And I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Carry you 100 miles if I had to, because you are worth it. You have always been worth it." Years continued to pass, marked by the steady accumulation of days lived well. The horse training business expanded until they needed to hire help. They bought more land, adding to their original 10 acres until they had a proper small ranch. James grew tall and strong, showing his father's way with horses. Sarah proved to have a head for business, helping Nora with the accounts when she was barely 10 years old. In 1889, they had another daughter, Emily, and in 1892, a second son they named Thomas. Their house rang with laughter and chaos, with the sounds of family. Tobias built additions to accommodate their growing brood, and Nora learned to manage a household that sometimes felt like controlled chaos, but was always filled with love. The town of Deeming grew up around them, transforming from a rough railroad town into a proper community with schools and churches and social organizations. Nora became involved in the local women's society, organizing fundraisers and charitable efforts. Tobias served on the town council for a term, using his practical problem-solving skills to help address various civic issues. They weathered hard times too. A drought in 1893 that made money tight and water scarce. The illness that swept through the town in 1895 and had them all sick with fever for 2 terrifying weeks. The accident when James, at 14, was thrown from a green horse and broke his arm. But they faced everything together. their partnership strong and resilient. On Nora's 40th birthday, Tobias gave her a gift that made her cry. It was a book, beautifully bound in leather, and when she opened it, she found it was not a printed book at all. It was blank pages, waiting to be filled. "I thought you could write our story," he said. "Everything that happened, how we met, how we built this life, so our children and their children will know. That is the most thoughtful gift anyone has ever given me. You are the most remarkable woman I have ever known. You deserve something remarkable." So Nora began to write, filling page after page with their history. She wrote about collapsing on the prairie, about waking in the arms of a stranger who would become everything to her. She wrote about learning to love, about building a home and a family. She wrote about the hard times and the good times, about the accumulation of days that made up a life well lived. James married at 22, bringing home a sweet girl named Catherine from a neighboring ranch. They built a house on a far corner of the property and started their own family. Sarah, practical and ambitious, went to business college in El Paso and returned to help expand the horse training operation into horse breeding as well. Emily showed talent as a teacher and got a position at the local school. Thomas, the baby, was still deciding what he wanted to do with his life, torn between his love of horses and his fascination with the railroad. On a summer evening in 1903, Nora and Tobias sat on their porch, now grandparents several times over, watching the sun set over the land they had built together. Tobias's hair was mostly gray now, and Nora had lines around her eyes that came from years of smiling. They held hands, fingers intertwined, comfortable in the silence that came from decades of knowing each other. "You have any regrets?" Nora asked. Tobias thought about that. "No, not a single one. You?" "Not one. Well, maybe one." He looked at her in surprise. "What?" "That my father did not live to see all this, to meet you, to know his grandchildren. He would have loved you so much. I wish I could have met him too. Any man who raised a daughter like you must have been something special." He was, and so are you. They sat in peaceful silence for a while longer, listening to the sounds of their family inside the house, the laughter and conversation, the sounds of life continuing forward. James's children were visiting, their voices high and excited as they told their Uncle Thomas some elaborate story. 22 years, Tobias said suddenly. "It has been 22 years since I found you. Best 22 years of my life. Mine too." He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it. "Thank you for saying yes, for taking a chance on a drifting cowboy with nothing but good intentions. Thank you for carrying me miles to safety, for saving my life in every way that matters." As the sun disappeared below the horizon and stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Nora thought about the journey that had brought them here. About the desperate walk across the prairie that had nearly killed her. About the moment when strong arms had lifted her up and a determined voice had promised to get her to safety. About falling in love with the man who saved her and building a life that exceeded anything she had dared to dream. She had collapsed from exhaustion on the prairie, alone and dying, with no hope and no future. Tobias had carried her miles to safety, and in doing so, he had carried her into a life filled with love and purpose and belonging. It was more than survival. It was redemption. It was the kind of love story people told their grandchildren about, the kind that inspired belief in second chances and the goodness that could exist in the human heart. The years continued to unfold in their steady rhythm. Tobias and Nora grew older together, their love deepening rather than fading with time. They celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary with a big party that brought together family and friends from across the territory. They danced to fiddle music in their yard, and when Tobias held her close and whispered that she was still the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, Nora believed him because the look in his eyes told her it was true. By 1910, they had 7 grandchildren with more on the way. The ranch had grown into a prosperous operation that employed several hands and was known throughout the territory for producing excellent horses. James had fully taken over the day-to-day operations, working alongside his father, and Sarah managed the business side with keen intelligence. Tobias, now in his mid-50s, had finally slowed down a bit, though he still insisted on working with the horses every day. His body bore the marks of decades of hard physical labor, old injuries that ached in cold weather, hands that were gnarled and scarred. But he still moved with purpose and confidence, still had that quiet competence that had attracted Nora to him all those years ago. Nora had aged gracefully, her dark hair now streaked with silver, her face lined but still beautiful. She spent her days managing the household, doting on her grandchildren, and continuing to write in the journal Tobias had given her. She had filled several volumes now, creating a comprehensive record of their life together. On a warm spring morning in 1911, Nora woke to find Tobias already up, standing at the window and looking out over their land. She joined him, slipping her arm around his waist. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, just remembering, "thinking about how far we have come." "It has been quite a journey." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Nora, I want you to know something. Every single day of these past 29 years, I have thanked God that my horse went lame that day. That I was walking that particular stretch of prairie at that particular time, that I found you. It was fate," Nora said softly. "It had to be. The chances of everything lining up the way it did are impossible otherwise. Maybe so. But fate or luck or divine providence, whatever it was, I am grateful for it every day. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, and you to me. You saved me, Tobias, and not just from the desert. You saved me from loneliness, from despair, from a life half lived. You gave me everything." They stood together in the morning light, holding each other, and Nora thought about how extraordinary it was that a moment of near death had led to a lifetime of love. How the worst day of her life had become the beginning of the best years. How this man, this wonderful, steadfast, loving man, had become her whole world. Their 30th anniversary came in the fall of 1912, and they celebrated quietly, just the two of them. They rode out to the creek on their property, the same creek that had been there when they first bought the land. They had a picnic in the shade of the cottonwood trees, eating sandwiches and drinking lemonade, talking about their children and grandchildren, about the plans for the ranch, about the changes they had seen in their decades in New Mexico. "You ever miss it?" Tobias asked. "The life you might have had if you had made it to California." "Not even for a moment. California was my father's dream, not mine. This is my dream. You are my dream." "Good, because I cannot imagine my life without you in it. You will never have to." They made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity, bodies that knew each other intimately, that had learned over decades exactly how to bring pleasure and comfort. Afterward, lying in Tobias's arms, Nora felt a profound sense of contentment. This was happiness, she thought. This deep, abiding peace that came from building a life with someone you loved, from creating something lasting and meaningful. The years that followed brought both joy and sorrow, as years inevitably do. They lost friends to age and illness. Henry Porter died in 1914, and Alice followed him 6 months later, dying, people said, of a broken heart. Mrs. Chen passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1916, leaving the boarding house to her daughter. Each loss was felt keenly, reminders of the passage of time and the fragility of life. But there were joys too, more grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. James's son, named Tobias after his grandfather, showed remarkable skill with horses even as a toddler. Sarah's daughter became a teacher like her Aunt Emily. The family grew and branched, creating a web of connections and love that spread across the territory. In 1920, on a hot summer day much like the day Tobias had found Nora all those years ago, they sat together on their porch, watching a thunderstorm build on the horizon. The air was heavy and electric, and lightning flickered in the distance. "I have been thinking," Tobias said, "about what happens after when I am gone. Do not talk about that. We have to talk about it sometime. We are not young anymore, Nora. I am 64 years old. These things need to be discussed." Nora knew he was right, but the thought of losing him was unbearable. "Not yet, please. Let's have a few more years before we have to face that." "As many as we can get," he agreed. "But when the time comes, I want you to know that I am not afraid. I have lived a good life. A wonderful life because of you. We built it together. We did. And it will continue after us. That is what matters. What we built will last." The storm moved in, bringing rain and cooler air. They sat together watching it, the way they had watched hundreds of storms over the years, and Nora held tight to Tobias's hand, as if she could keep him with her through sheer force of will. They were granted those few more years. Tobias remained active well into his late 60s, still working with horses, still involved in the ranch operations. His health was generally good, though he tired more easily than he used to, and his old injuries bothered him more as he aged. Nora, at 63, was still sharp and energetic, though she had handed over most of the business management to Sarah years ago. She spent her time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, passing on stories and recipes, and lessons learned over a lifetime. On a cold January night in 1925, Tobias suffered a heart attack in his sleep. Nora woke to find him gone, his hand still holding hers, his face peaceful. She sat with him for a long time in the darkness, holding his hand, talking to him, telling him goodbye. When dawn came and James found them, Nora was calm and composed, though her heart was shattered. The funeral was enormous, bringing together what seemed like half the territory. Tobias had touched many lives over the years, had been respected and loved by a wide circle of friends and family. They buried him on a hillside on the ranch, under a cottonwood tree, with a view of the land he had loved and worked. Nora stood at the grave after everyone else had left, looking down at the fresh earth. She was 66 years old, and the man who had saved her life and then made that life worth living was gone. The pain was enormous, a physical ache in her chest that made it hard to breathe, but she did not collapse. She stood straight and strong, the way Tobias would have wanted her to. Because he had taught her to be strong, to endure, to build something that would last beyond either of them. She lived for another 10 years, surrounded by her family, watching the ranch continue to grow and prosper. She finished writing their story, filling the last pages of the final journal with the account of Tobias's death and her grief. But she also wrote about the legacy he left behind, the family he had helped create, the values he had instilled in his children and grandchildren. On her 76th birthday, sitting on the porch of the house Tobias had built, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, Nora felt his presence as strongly as if he were sitting beside her. She could almost hear his voice, feel his hand in hers. "We did well, did we not?" she said softly, knowing he could not answer but believing somehow that he could hear her. "We built something beautiful, something lasting." A breeze stirred the air, warm and gentle, and Nora smiled. She had been given 43 years with the man she loved, years filled with joy and purpose and belonging. It was more than many people got, more than she had dared hope for that day when she collapsed on the prairie with death reaching for her. Tobias had carried her miles to safety, and in doing so, he had carried her into a life beyond her wildest dreams. They had built a home, raised a family, created a legacy of love that would continue long after both of them were gone. It was, she thought, the very definition of a life well lived. Nora Reeves Morgan passed away peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1935, at the age of 76. She was buried next to Tobias on the hillside, under the cottonwood trees, where they could rest together, overlooking the land they had loved. Their children erected a simple headstone that bore both their names and a single line of inscription that Nora had requested. She collapsed from exhaustion on the prairie. He carried her miles to safety. Together, they built a life of love. The ranch continued to prosper under James's guidance and eventually passed to his children. The house Tobias built still stood, carefully maintained and expanded over the years, but keeping its essential character. The journals Nora had filled with their story were preserved and passed down through the generations, becoming treasured family heirlooms that told of love and courage, and the power of two people to build something lasting against all odds. And sometimes, on hot summer days when the air shimmered with heat, ranch hands swore they could see two figures walking hand in hand through the prairie grass, a tall man and a dark-haired woman, forever young, forever together, forever in love. It was just a story, of course, the kind of romantic legend that grows up around remarkable lives. But the family always smiled when they heard it because they knew the truth. Love like that did not end with death. It echoed forward through time, carried in the hearts of children and grandchildren in the values passed down, in the example of two people who had found each other against impossible odds and built a life together that nothing, not even death itself, could truly end. The story of Tobias and Nora Morgan became part of the fabric of Deeming, one of those foundational tales that define the character of a place. People told it to their children as an example of courage and love, of how two people with nothing but each other could build something lasting and beautiful. The ranch they founded became a landmark, and more than one young couple starting their own lives together would ride out to the hillside where Tobias and Nora were buried, standing hand in hand and making promises to each other about the life they would build. Inspired by the example of the cowboy who had carried a dying woman miles to safety, and the woman who had loved him for the rest of her days. It was a love story for the ages, born from desperation, and nurtured through decades of partnership and devotion. It was proof that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can become doorways to the best, that fate or luck or divine providence can step in at the darkest hour. That love, when it is true and deep and committed, can transform everything. And so their story lived on, passed down through generations, a testament to the power of love to save us, to redeem us, to give our lives meaning and purpose. Tobias Morgan, the cowboy who could not leave a dying woman on the prairie, and Nora Reeves, the woman who had nearly given up hope but found salvation in the arms of a stranger who became her everything. Together they built a legacy that would endure far beyond their own lifetimes. A legacy written not just in property and prosperity but in love, in family, in the countless lives they touched and influenced through their example. Their love had begun with an act of desperate courage on a burning prairie in the summer of 1881, and it had grown into something vast and enduring, a love that shaped not just their own lives but the lives of everyone who came after them. It was, in the end, exactly the kind of love story that deserved to be told and retold, remembered and celebrated. A shining example of what two people could build when they committed themselves fully to each other, and to the life they wanted to create. And if sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sunset painted the New Mexico sky in shades of gold and crimson, people claimed they could hear a woman singing softly on the wind and a man's deep voice joining in, well, who was to say it was not possible? Love like that did not simply disappear. It became part of the land itself, woven into the fabric of the place where it had flourished, eternal and unbreakable. A promise that true love, when found, could last forever.